She's doing it right now, and you're letting her get away with it. Every single day, women are crossing psychological boundaries that would make Carl Jung roll over in his grave, and most men are so desperate for female approval that they smile and take it. But what if I told you that the very behaviors you're tolerating are the exact same behaviors that are killing her attraction to you? What if I told you that every time you allow these boundary violations, you're unconsciously training her to lose respect for you as a man? If you've ever felt disrespected, manipulated, or taken for granted by a woman, if you're tired of being treated like a backup plan while she gives her best energy to other men, smash that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to learn will fundamentally change how women treat you for the rest of your life. Carl Jung discovered something profound about human psychology that most men today have completely forgotten. Respect is not given, it's commanded through psychological positioning. Every woman you interact with is unconsciously testing your boundaries, pushing against your limits, seeing how much disrespect you'll tolerate before you finally stand up for yourself. And here's the shocking truth. The more you tolerate, the less she respects you. Jung called this the shadow projection, when people unconsciously dump their psychological garbage onto others to see if they'll accept it. Women do this constantly with men, not because they're evil, but because it's an unconscious psychological mechanism designed to test masculine strength and psychological boundaries. The problem is that most modern men have no idea this is happening. You think you're being understanding when you tolerate her disrespectful behavior. You think you're being a good guy when you make excuses for her mood swings, her manipulation tactics, her emotional outbursts. But what you're actually doing is failing every single psychological test she's giving you. You're proving to her, unconscious mind, that you lack the masculine strength to maintain boundaries and command respect. And here's what will shock you to your core. The women who disrespect you the most are actually the ones who are most desperately hoping you'll finally stand up to them. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Jung observed that the feminine psyche craves what he called psychological containment, the presence of masculine energy strong enough to hold boundaries and maintain order in the face of emotional chaos. When a woman tests your boundaries and you fail to hold them, she doesn't feel victorious. She feels psychologically unsafe. Her unconscious mind interprets your weakness as a sign that you can't protect her from her own destructive impulses. This is why women often become more disrespectful and difficult after you've tolerated their bad behavior. They're not trying to hurt you. They're unconsciously escalating their tests, hoping you'll finally demonstrate the masculine strength they're desperately seeking. But when you continue to fail these tests, when you keep accepting unacceptable behavior, something dies in her attraction to you. The first shocking rule that will transform how women treat you is never tolerate disrespect disguised as honesty. Women have been conditioned to believe that they can say whatever they want to men as long as they frame it as just being honest or sharing their feelings. They'll insult your appearance, criticize your goals, mock your interests, and then act shocked when you get upset because they were just being real. This is psychological manipulation at its finest. She's testing to see if you have enough self-respect to reject her toxic honesty and maintain your dignity. When you accept her insults and criticisms without pushback, you're telling her unconscious mind that you believe her negative assessment of you is accurate. You're confirming that you don't value yourself enough to demand respectful treatment. The high-value man immediately calls out this behavior. He doesn't get angry or defensive. He simply states clearly that disrespectful communication is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. He doesn't try to argue or defend himself because he understands that the content of her criticism is irrelevant. The issue is her disrespectful delivery. The second shocking rule builds on this foundation. Never tolerate being treated as An emotional dumping ground. Jung wrote extensively about what he called psychological projection, the unconscious tendency to dump our own unprocessed emotional material onto others. Many women have learned that they can use men as free therapy sessions, unloading all their emotional baggage without any consideration for the man's psychological well-being. She'll spend hours complaining about her problems, her drama, her conflicts with other people, expecting you to listen, validate, and provide solutions. But notice what happens when you try to share your own struggles or concerns. Suddenly she's too busy, too tired, or too overwhelmed to reciprocate the emotional support she expects from you. This isn't conscious manipulation, it's unconscious psychological boundary testing. She's seeing if you value your own emotional energy enough to protect it from being drained by her constant need for validation and support. When you allow yourself to become her unpaid therapist, you're failing a crucial psychological test. But here's where most men get this completely wrong. They think the solution is to become cold or emotionally unavailable. That's not strength, that's just another form of weakness. Let me show you the difference between psychological boundaries and emotional walls. Healthy boundaries aren't about shutting down or becoming emotionally distant. They're about maintaining your own psychological center while still being able to offer appropriate support. When she starts using you as an emotional dumping ground, you don't get angry or withdraw completely. You simply redirect the interaction toward balance and mutual respect. You might say something like, "I can see you're dealing with a lot right now, but I notice our conversations have become very one-sided. I'm happy to support you, but I also need to feel like my own thoughts and feelings matter in this relationship." This communicates that you're willing to be supportive while also maintaining your own psychological boundaries. The key is that you're not trying to fix her problems or absorb her emotional chaos. You're offering to be present with her while she works through her own issues, but you're not taking responsibility for managing her emotional state. This subtle distinction makes all the difference in how she perceives and treats you. When you can maintain this balance, supportive but not codependent, caring but not caretaking, you demonstrate the kind of masculine psychological strength that women find irresistibly attractive. You show that you're strong enough to handle her emotional complexity without losing yourself in the process. The third shocking rule will completely change how you handle women's manipulative behavior. Never tolerate being punished for other men's actions. Jung discovered that we all carry unconscious complexes, emotional patterns formed by past experiences that get projected onto current relationships. Many women carry deep resentment toward men based on how they've been treated by previous partners, and they unconsciously punish innocent men for crimes they didn't commit. She might withdraw affection because all men are cheaters, even though you've never given her reason to doubt your loyalty. She might refuse to trust you because men always leave, even though you've consistently shown up for her. She might treat you with suspicion and hostility because men only want one thing, even though you've demonstrated genuine care for her. As a person, this is psychological transference. She's unconsciously relating to you as if you were the men who hurt her in the past. Most men try to prove their innocence by working harder to earn her trust, becoming more accommodating, more patient, more understanding. This is exactly the wrong approach because it accepts the premise that you're guilty until proven innocent. The high-value man refuses to accept punishment for crimes he didn't commit. When she treats him with suspicion or hostility based on her past experiences, he doesn't try to convince her that he's different. He simply states that he will not tolerate being treated as if he's guilty of other men's actions. He maintains his dignity while allowing her to work through her own psychological projections. And this is where it gets really interesting, because when you refuse to accept unearned punishment, you actually help her heal from her past trauma. But when you tolerate it, you reinforce her victim mentality and keep her stuck in destructive patterns. When you stand firm against being punished for other men's actions, you force her to confront the difference between past and present, between her projections and reality. You become a healing presence in her life rather than another source of resentment and disappointment. But this only works if you maintain your boundaries with strength and compassion, not anger or defensiveness. The fourth shocking rule addresses one of the most common ways women test masculine boundaries. Never tolerate being compared to other men in a way that diminishes your value. Jung understood that comparison is one of the primary ways the ego maintains its sense of superiority and control. Women often use comparison as a psychological weapon to manipulate men's insecurities and gain leverage in relationships. She might casually mention how much money her friend's boyfriend makes, hoping to trigger your financial insecurities. She might talk about how romantic her ex was, hoping to make you try harder to impress her. She might praise other men's physical attributes in front of you, hoping to make you feel inadequate and more desperate for her approval. This behavior serves two psychological functions. It tests whether you're secure enough in your own value to resist manipulation, and it attempts to gain power by triggering your competitive instincts. Most men either get defensive and angry, or they try to compete by proving they're better than the other men she's mentioned. Both responses fail the test because they show that your self-worth is dependent on external validation. The psychologically sophisticated man recognizes these comparison tactics for what they are: manipulative attempts to trigger insecurity and gain psychological leverage. He doesn't get angry or defensive, and he doesn't try to compete or prove himself. He simply refuses to engage with the manipulation by maintaining his own sense of worth, independent of her comparisons. But here's what most men don't realize. When you fail to maintain your boundaries around comparison manipulation, you're actually training her to lose attraction to you. Let me explain why this psychological dynamic is so powerful. When she compares you to other men and you react with insecurity or desperation to prove yourself, you're demonstrating that your sense of self-worth is fragile and dependent on her approval. This triggers what Jung called psychological contempt, an unconscious loss of respect for people who don't value themselves enough to maintain their dignity under pressure. She may not consciously realize what she's doing, but her unconscious mind is constantly evaluating whether you have the psychological strength to resist manipulation and maintain your own center. When you fail these tests, when you allow her comparisons to trigger your insecurities, you're proving that you lack the masculine psychological strength she's unconsciously seeking. The fifth shocking rule deals with one of the most destructive patterns in modern relationships: never tolerate being made responsible for her emotional regulation. Jung observed that psychological maturity requires the ability to manage one's own emotional states without making others responsible for our internal experience. Many women have learned to outsource their emotional regulation to men, making them responsible for maintaining her happiness and stability. She gets upset and expects you to fix it. She feels insecure and demands constant reassurance. She experiences anxiety and requires you to change your behavior to accommodate her fears. Over time, you become walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring her emotional state and adjusting your actions to prevent her from becoming upset. This creates what Jung called psychological codependency, a dysfunctional dynamic where one person's emotional well-being becomes dependent on another person's behavior. Not only is this exhausting for you, but it's actually preventing her from developing the emotional maturity necessary for healthy relationships. When you take responsibility for managing her emotions, you're enabling her psychological immaturity and creating resentment on both sides. She resents having to depend on you for her emotional stability, and you resent being held responsible for feelings you can't control. This dynamic destroys attraction and creates the kind of mother-son relationship dynamic that kills romantic connection. The emotionally mature man understands that he can be supportive and caring without taking responsibility for another person's emotional state. He offers comfort and understanding while maintaining clear boundaries around what he will and won't do to manage her feelings. He supports her in developing her own emotional regulation skills rather than becoming her emotional caretaker. And here's the shocking truth that will change everything. When you stop managing her emotions for her, she doesn't become more upset. She actually becomes more attracted to you. Let me show you why this psychological principle is so powerful. When you refuse to take responsibility for her emotional regulation, you force her to develop her own internal resources for managing difficult feelings. This promotes what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a psychologically mature and self-sufficient individual. As she develops these skills, she gains respect for you as the man who helped her grow rather than enabled her dysfunction. The sixth shocking rule addresses a pattern that destroys more relationships than infidelity. Never tolerate being treated as a convenience rather than a priority. Jung wrote about the importance of what he called psychological reciprocity, the balanced exchange of energy, attention, and consideration that characterizes healthy relationships. When this reciprocity breaks down, the relationship becomes parasitic rather than symbiotic. She expects you to be available whenever she needs something, but she's always too busy when you need support. She wants your undivided attention when she's talking, but she's constantly distracted by her phone when you're sharing something important. She demands your time and energy, but offers nothing meaningful in return. This isn't just about being used for practical things like money or favors. It's about being treated as if your thoughts, feelings, and needs are less important than hers. You become a supporting character in her life story rather than an equal partner deserving of consideration and respect. Most men tolerate this because they've been conditioned to believe that relationships require sacrifice and that love means putting her needs above your own. But Jung understood that healthy relationships require what he called conscious reciprocity, both people actively considering each other's well-being and contributing to the relationship's health. When you allow yourself to be treated as a convenience, you're sending a clear message that you don't value your own time and energy enough to demand reciprocal consideration. This creates psychological contempt because she unconsciously recognizes that you don't respect yourself enough to maintain appropriate boundaries. The seventh shocking rule builds on this foundation. Never tolerate being kept as a backup option while she explores other possibilities. Jung observed that genuine love requires what he called psychological commitment, the willingness to fully invest in one person rather than keeping multiple options open as insurance policies. Many women today have learned to maintain what they call options, keeping several men emotionally invested while never fully committing to any of them. They give just enough attention and affection to keep you hoping while never giving you the clarity and commitment you deserve. This creates what Jung called psychological limbo, a state of uncertainty that prevents genuine intimacy and connection from developing. You're never sure where you stand, never confident in her feelings, never able to fully relax into the relationship because you sense that you're competing with other men for her attention and affection. Most men tolerate this because they hope that if they're patient and understanding enough, she'll eventually choose them over her other options. But this strategy backfires because it demonstrates that you're willing to accept a position of uncertainty and competition rather than demanding the clarity and commitment you deserve. The high-value man refuses to be anyone's backup plan. He understands that his time and emotional energy are valuable resources that should only be invested in women who are willing to reciprocate with genuine interest and commitment. He doesn't try to compete with other men for her attention. He simply makes it clear that he's looking for mutual commitment and won't tolerate being strung along. The eighth shocking rule addresses one of the most subtle forms of disrespect. Never tolerate being dismissed or minimized when you express your needs or concerns. Jung emphasized the importance of what he called psychological validation, the recognition that another person's thoughts and feelings are legitimate and worthy of consideration. When you share something important with her and she responds with dismissal, minimization, or mockery, she's communicating that your inner experience doesn't matter to her. She might roll her eyes, change the subject, or tell you that you're being too sensitive or overreacting. This is a form of psychological invalidation that slowly erodes your sense of self-worth and your ability to communicate authentically. Most men internalize this treatment and begin to doubt their own perceptions and feelings. They start to believe that maybe they are being too sensitive, maybe their concerns aren't legitimate, maybe they should just accept whatever treatment they receive without complaint. This is exactly what psychological manipulation is designed to achieve, making you doubt your own reality and accept unacceptable treatment. The ninth shocking rule deals with one of the most dangerous patterns in modern relationships. Never tolerate being guilt-tripped or emotionally manipulated when you maintain your boundaries. Jung understood that guilt is often used as a weapon to control others' behavior and override their natural psychological boundaries. When you start maintaining healthy boundaries, when you stop tolerating disrespectful behavior, many women will escalate their manipulation tactics. They'll accuse you of not caring, of being selfish, of not understanding their feelings. They'll use guilt, shame, and emotional manipulation to try to get you to return to your previous pattern of accommodation and boundary crossing. This is what Jung called psychological resistance, the unconscious tendency to fight against changes that threaten established power dynamics. When you stop being controllable through manipulation, when you start demanding respectful treatment, it threatens her ability to use emotional manipulation to get what she wants. Most men cave in at this point because they can't handle being seen as the bad guy. They'd rather return to being disrespected than deal with the temporary discomfort of being accused of not caring. But this is exactly when maintaining your boundaries becomes most important. The high-value man understands that temporary discomfort from standing up for yourself is always preferable to long-term resentment from being repeatedly disrespected. He doesn't try to defend himself against guilt-tripping and manipulation. He simply maintains his boundaries and allows her to have whatever emotional response she chooses. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of developing psychological boundaries because it requires you to be comfortable with another person's disapproval. Most men are so desperate for female approval that they'll sacrifice their own dignity to avoid conflict. But Jung understood that true psychological strength requires the ability to maintain your integrity even when others are upset with you. The 10th and final shocking rule synthesizes everything we've discussed. Never tolerate being in a relationship where you have to sacrifice your authentic self to maintain peace. Jung called this psychological self-betrayal, the gradual abandonment of your own values, interests, and identity in order to avoid conflict or gain approval. Over time, many men find themselves becoming smaller, more accommodating, less authentic versions of themselves in order to keep their relationships stable. They stop pursuing their goals, abandon their interests, suppress their opinions, and modify their behavior to avoid triggering her negative reactions. This isn't love, it's psychological suicide. Jung emphasized that healthy relationships should support what he called individuation, the process of becoming more authentically yourself, not less. When you have to constantly edit yourself, walk on eggshells, or suppress your natural personality to maintain a relationship, you're in a psychologically toxic dynamic that will eventually destroy both your self-respect and your attraction to each other. The woman who truly loves you will appreciate your authentic self, even when you disagree or have different preferences. She won't try to change you into someone else or make you feel guilty for having your own opinions and desires. She'll support your growth and development rather than trying to control or diminish you. When you maintain these 10 psychological boundaries, something profound happens. You stop attracting women who want to use, manipulate, or control you, and you start attracting women who genuinely respect and appreciate masculine strength and integrity. You create a completely different dynamic in your relationships based on mutual respect rather than power struggles and manipulation. This doesn't mean becoming harsh or unforgiving. It means developing the psychological sophistication to recognize disrespectful behavior and the courage to address it appropriately. It means caring enough about your own well-being and the health of your relationships to maintain standards that promote growth and mutual respect. Jung understood that true love can only exist between two psychologically mature individuals who respect each other's boundaries and support each other's development. Everything else is just codependency, manipulation, or mutual emotional addiction disguised as romance. The journey from accepting disrespect to commanding respect begins with a single decision. The decision to value yourself enough to maintain appropriate boundaries. It requires courage, consistency, and the willingness to lose relationships that aren't serving your highest good. But the alternative, a life of being disrespected, manipulated, and taken for granted, is far worse than the temporary discomfort of standing up for yourself. Remember, respect is not negotiable. Boundaries are not suggestions, and your dignity is not for sale. When you truly understand and implement these principles, you'll discover that the right woman will not only respect your boundaries, she'll be grateful that you're strong enough to maintain them.